1 year ago today, Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID, and basically the world of sports began to shut down. And you remember, and I think you will be talking about with your kids, maybe even your grandkids in the years ahead, as there will likely be a ton of documentaries that are done. You remember what it was like as all of the conference basketball tournaments started to end and guys were legitimately being pulled off of the court as they were getting ready to play, or in the case of some games, during halftime, where they just came in and said, hey, this game is over. That's what happened in the Big East. They got the first half in, and then they shut it down for the second half. And now it is a year later, a full year later, since Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID and the world of sports basically shut down in that 24 hours, in the ensuing 24 hours. And I thought it was incredibly ironic to see the news coming out of Texas the next day, the day before, I should say, this 1 year anniversary. When we've been talking about this on this show for a long time, when will stadiums be back to 100% capacity? And I think as quickly as things shut down, I think there's going to be a really quick return now of 100% capacity, because the Texas Rangers came out and they said it is their intent to play in front of a packed house for Major League Baseball opening day. We've been debating on this show, when was that date going to be? And some people said April, and some people said May. And initially I was saying, hey, I think we'll have 100% capacity by the All-Star game in July. And some people told me I was crazy. And then Joe Biden came out and said, hey, everybody is going to have the right to take the vaccine by May 31st. And I said, well, by June 1st, everything needs to be back up and running. And I shifted to April or May. The state of Texas basically has decided to open back up 100%. And so the Texas Rangers have vaulted to the front of the line as it pertains to arguments about 100% capacity by early April. Dub, you can look up exactly what day the Texas Rangers play their first home game. I don't know if anybody else is going to jump the line in front of the Texas Rangers. I find it hard to believe. But I think crowds are going to come back in a hurry. The question is going to be how many people are going to be interested in going to, for instance, Major League Baseball games outside. How many people are going to want to go to the NBA, particularly as the playoffs get closer. I'm genuinely intrigued to see what that scenario and situation is going to look like. But I'm incredibly optimistic that we are going to see full stadiums in many parts of the country, beginning with Texas and beginning with Florida, compared to every other place out there. And as a part of that, the Dallas Cowboys, in announcing Dak Prescott yesterday, came out and said that they are going to be having 100% capacity in the Dallas Cowboys stadium as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that press conference with Jerry Jones and Dak Prescott. April 5th, by the way, is the first home Rangers game that will be played against Toronto. So by April 5th, we will have 100% stadium capacity in at least one stadium in the great state of Texas. Now, I have been arguing for this for months because I went to NFL games, I went to college football games, I went to college basketball games. I may even try to go up to Indianapolis next week, depending on what some of the games look like over the weekend, and may try to even go watch some of those games. Not that bad of a drive from Nashville up to Indianapolis, depending on how the ticket situation looks. I may even be going up and watching some NCAA tournament games next weekend. But the argument out there that I think is fascinating about this is, did we actually get it right? Now that, in many respects, the Corona Bros, as I called them, have lost the battle of sports. And I'll be honest with you, the Corona Bros won many of the battles in March and April. And they thought they were going to win the battle to shut down all of college athletics. and they thought they were going to win the battle to keep the NBA from coming back. Because remember, it's actually kind of funny to go back and listen to probably some of those clips. But way before the NBA talked about playing in a bubble, I remember coming on this show and saying, hey, I got an idea. The NBA should just play in a bubble. And everybody ridiculed me. Like it was the dumbest idea that had ever existed. I said the same thing about the NHL. I said they could just take over a college campus that had been abandoned or a place where they could set up security. I suggested Las Vegas as a potential destination with all the hotels there and all the basketball courts and facilities. They ended up going to Disney World, which is a really good solution, I think. But a lot of people told me that was crazy. I think now the question that is going to start to be asked more and more in the months and the years ahead is, let's look back, just like we would in any game that takes place. What do we always say? Hindsight's 20/20. Your team wins, you go back and you look at the game and you say, boy, that was really a bad play call. If we hadn't turned the ball over there, boy, if we had scored on that drive, if the ref hadn't called goaltending on that play, if we hadn't pulled our goalie a little bit early, all of this different Monday morning quarterbacking, so to speak, the hindsight, an analysis of games that took place in order to try to figure out why did we lose, how do we win next time, all of that takes place. I think now the next step of looking at all these decisions is going to be made, and I think sports did a decent job getting back. But I think in retrospect, there was no actual reason to shut down sports for more than about 2 weeks. And some of you out there are like, oh my God, how would you ever say that, Clay? Well, the answer is because they told us that we had 15 days to slow the spread, and it's still a year later. And a lot of people out there listening to me right now, your kids still aren't in school. Your job may not exist anymore. Your favorite restaurant or your favorite bar may have had to close down. There certainly have been a lot of people get ill and die, but none of those factors have applied to young athletes. And in fact, if you look at the data, and this is something that almost no one talks about, the NBA playing outside of a bubble this year, COVID has been far more prevalent now than it was in July, August, September, and October when they played inside the bubble last year. In other words, the NBA started their season in a world where COVID was far more common. And when we shut down all these different leagues, they came back with COVID being far more prevalent than it was when we shut them down. For instance, when baseball opened back up, there were far more cases of COVID in July and August and September than there were in March, April, and May when baseball didn't play at all. So in terms of the raw numbers of COVID, I actually think looking back on everything retrospectively now, you can make an argument that outside of that first couple of weeks when everybody was panicking, we should have almost immediately opened everything back up. I think that's what the data is going to show. I really do. And I hope that as all of this data is analyzed and looked at, we learn massive lessons about our failures and also our media's failures as it came to embracing all the worst storylines. And let me give you an example of 2 states in this country that had diametrically opposed responses to COVID and the results that we have seen for them as a result of that. Okay? I'm going to start with the state of Florida. The state of Florida, I'm focusing primarily on sports, although I'm also going to talk about the larger economic situations. The state of Florida, if you are a sports fan, has been the single most instrumental place to returning sports. And let me explain what I mean. If you remember when everything shut down in March, do you remember what the first big event was that you could watch that was somewhat sports related after several weeks without any sports? WWE's WrestleMania. Where did that happen? In early April of 2020? Florida. What came after that? NASCAR was one of the first sports to come back, and they came back with crowds present. Where did they do it? Initially in South Carolina, but then they went, if I remember correctly, straight down to Florida. Remember the golf challenge that we saw? The great battle between Phil Mickelson and Tiger Woods and Tom Brady and Charles Barkley? Where did that happen? Florida. What about the NBA bubble? Happens in Florida. The college football national championship game happens with crowds present in Florida. The Super Bowl happens with crowds present in Tampa. The Daytona 500 just happened with crowds present. All of these events, if you go back and rewrite and restudy everything that happened in the world of sports, the state of Florida, also the state of Texas, but the state of Florida more so than any place else, was the most instrumental in returning sports to our national entertainment pastime. State that has restricted things more than anywhere else. By the way, state of Florida also opens all of their schools. If your kids are in public school in Florida, they had an option to go. They also, in the state of Florida, opened up all of their amusement parks, Disney World, SeaWorld, Universal Studios, all of them opened up by July of last year. All of these things are happening. The beaches are all open. The parks are all open. I told you, I haven't hidden any of my actions throughout the entirety of this crazy pandemic. We were here talking with you every single day. I moved my family down to Florida for the month of May. We hung out at the beaches. They were all open. Florida, more so than any big state in the country, has stayed open. The state that has actually shut down more so than I believe any state in the country, many of you are listening to me right now in that state, California. Gavin Newsom, all sorts of draconian lockdown rules. San Francisco 49ers, they have to move to Arizona to finish their season. No fans allowed for any events. The Pac-12 can't even play until freaking November. They get left behind by the ACC, the SEC, the Big 12. No one is in school in California in big numbers unless you're fortunate enough to be able to afford private school, as many, by the way, of the lockdown politicians are. Kids aren't able to play any kind of athletics. I believe high school football is just now returning in the city of Los Angeles this weekend. Crazy. The most locked down big state over that long period of time, the state of California. How is the data between the state of California and between the state of Florida, right? Objectively, let's start with two different things. Let's look at the death rate from COVID, and let's also consider the unemployment rate. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the absolute most up-to-date numbers when it comes to unemployment rates, the state of Florida has a 5.1% unemployment rate. The state of California has a 9.3% unemployment rate. California almost has double the unemployment rate of the state of Florida. Okay? Some of you out there are like, okay, but what about safety? What about the safety of locking down the state of California like we did compared to those Neanderthals down in Florida? Well, it's an interesting data analysis there as well. You can go and look this up yourself to the Worldometer site, and you can look at the death rate per 1 million people from COVID. And do you know what you find there? California is almost identical. The death rate in California from COVID is almost identical to Florida, even though Florida has far, far, far more elderly people, and elderly people have been the most at risk since this all started from COVID. In particular, the death rate per 1 million in the state of California, this is the data literally as I am looking at it from yesterday, 1,385 per million. Florida is 1,490. If you adjust Florida's population to take into account the fact that they have a much more substantial elderly population than California, Florida has a lower death rate and an infinitely lower unemployment rate. They have had fans present. All of their amusement parks have been open. Governor Gavin Newsom is getting recalled because people are starting to see this data and they are saying, my goodness, what they told us about the lockdowns all being necessary in order to save lives were not true. The data reflects that the numbers ended up being not very different at all, whether you lock down and cost all these small businesses to go out of business and everybody to lose their jobs, or whether you stayed as open as a state could, like Florida. In other words, California, when you adjust for population, has more deaths than Florida does, despite the fact that Florida put all their kids in school, they played all their sports, they allowed everybody to come and actually be able to attend games, and they kept open all their businesses, indoor dining, all their restaurants, all of their amusement parks. Consider Disney World versus Disneyland. Disneyland is still shut down. It's been shut down for a year. Disney World has been open for a year. They haven't seen any COVID cases come from Disney World. It's outdoors. It's safe. I took my family to Universal Studios. I'm sharing facts with you that almost no one will in the world of media, period, and hardly anyone in the world of sports media. Florida led us out of the sports shutdown. California almost still hasn't opened up sports, and they still have gotten no benefit from it. That's the difference between a leader who looks at the data and makes smart, calculated decisions like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis did, and a governor who buys into the fear and doesn't look at the science and the data like Gavin Newsom did. Again, these are facts. You can look them up yourself. I'm going to write an article and lay it all out for you on Thursday afternoon at Outkick. That should be up by Thursday afternoon. I'm giving you an early preview for what I'm going to be writing today. I've already done all the research. I'm comparing Florida and California, two states that went completely in different directions with COVID, and Florida has dunked all balls in the face style on the state of California. It's data. It's not my opinion. It's directly what the factual data shows us to be true. And I bet many of you right now, on the anniversary of the Rudy Gobert shutdown, your minds are blown because you're like, holy cow, how did I not know this? California, 9.3% unemployment rate. A lot of you listening to me in California right now may well have lost your jobs. You might have lost your business. Florida, 5.1% unemployment rate. No difference in the death rate. In fact, if you adjust based on the age of the population, Florida has done a better job with COVID than California did.